Donald Trump promised a new era of reciprocal trade, a world where US tariffs forced allies and rivals alike to bend to American will. Deals were signed, headlines screamed victories, and 350 billion pledges from South Korea flashed as proof of Trump's genius. Cars, lumber, pharmaceuticals, every product became a lever in the president's high-stakes poker game. Yet now, barely months later, Trump is slapping South Korea with 25% tariffs, citing slow ratification while threatening the same universal punishment on all countries. Japan, China, India, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, everywhere. Deals crumble, promises stall, retaliation simmers, and US consumers pay the price. The photo op victories of 2025 are unraveling before our eyes. Is this empire of tariffs actually boosting America, or has Trump's grand trade strategy hit an unstoppable roadblock? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. Trump's post-2025 tariff blitz was supposed to reshape global trade. 10 to 25% levies on 12 nations with carve-outs for compliant partners. South Korea saw a 15% cap. Japan's autos were temporarily spared. India signed a partial framework, but none stuck. Legislatures balked, investments stalled, and retaliation struck hard. Chinese duties skyrocketed to 145%. Brazil imposed 50% tariffs, and North American allies countered with steel, dairy, and autos. Markets wavered, manufacturers complained, inflation crept higher. Deals meant to be historic wins turned into bitter stalemates, echoing patterns from Trump 1.0. With global trade teetering and US leverage questioned, is it time to ask, were these tariffs ever a good idea for America at all? Trump's January 26, 2026 announcement of 25% tariffs on South Korea was framed as reciprocity. But the reality is anything but reciprocal. The National Assembly in Seoul has yet to ratify a $350 billion investment pledge, while US companies are left paying billions extra for cars, electronics, and drugs. Markets reacted. Hyundai shares dipped 4%. Kospi fell 2.5%, yet the US consumer foots the bill. This pattern repeats globally. India's 25 to 50% tariffs hit pharma and steel. China faces tit-for-tat duties on $500 billion in goods. Brazil retaliates on ethanol and beef, and Japan's auto deal collapses. For Trump, leverage looks good in tweets, but in execution, it is chaos. The economic math is brutal. Tariffs are taxes on US importers, but 80 to 100% of the cost passes directly to consumers. Cars jump $2,000 to $3,000, electronics spike 15%, wages remain flat, and household bills rise by thousands. Manufacturing relies on foreign inputs, yet supply chains divert to Vietnam, Mexico, and beyond, leaving US factories unchanged. Deficits remain stubborn, even grow, because tariffs cannot fix structural gaps in savings and investment. Retaliation erodes any temporary gains. Farmers lose billions, industrial sectors see margins shrink, and key contracts, like Korean shipbuilding for the Navy, face delays. Is America winning, or is Trump's tariff poker simply bleeding the economy? South Korea is the perfect case study. A $350 billion investment pledge, hailed as historic, stalls in Parliament. Ratification drags amid political opposition and economic feasibility concerns.
They have a monopoly of 80 to 90%. Of course, we may end up shouldering some of the burden, but most of it is likely to be passed on to U.S. prices. We had already reached an agreement with the United States to ensure our chip makers would not be left at a disadvantage to Taiwan and other global competitors. We anticipated that this scenario could occur. According to relevant authorities in charge, the $1 exchange rate, is expected to fall to around 1,400 after a month or two. This is not a unique situation only happening to South Korea, so domestic policies alone would not be sufficient to reverse it. The recent depreciation in the won. But we will continue to make efforts to find sustainable policy tools to stabilize exchange rates. There is benefit in getting it, North Korea, to halt nuclear material production, cease exports, and stop developing ICBMs. Even suspending the current stage is still in our interest. That's the reality.
Trump raises tariffs from 15 to 25%, threatening all sectors: auto, pharma, lumber. Seoul warns of WTO action, possible retaliatory tariffs on US beef and supply chain disruptions. Hyundai and Kia lobby for exemptions. Consumers and investors hold their breath. Meanwhile, US importers brace for higher costs and inflation nudges upward. What was meant as leverage has turned into a high-stakes gamble where every stakeholder pays and nobody seems to win.
You can imagine that after the message went out, the Koreans swiftly contacted me and contacted others. Again, last summer, we reached a framework agreement with Korea. We implemented our portion where we modified our tariff rates. They were at 25%. We moved down to 15% for Korea as a show of good faith. They have not executed their part. They haven't implemented it. They have a commitment to invest $350 billion in the United States over the next 3 years. And they also have a commitment to allow more U.S. cars into Korea, to eliminate some of their non-tariff barriers on agriculture, to treat our digital companies fairly. But in the meantime, they haven't been able to get a bill through to do the investment. They've introduced new laws on digital services. They haven't done what they needed to do on agriculture and industry. And so it's hard to continue to hold up our end of the bargain while they have not moved forward swiftly enough on their end.
China's tariffs illustrate the same failure. From a baseline 10% fentanyl duty, Trump escalates to 145% by April 2025. Beijing retaliates with 34 to 125% duties, bans on rare earth minerals, and targeting US companies. Phase 2 trade talks stall indefinitely. Exports from the US suffer across agriculture, tech, and industrial goods. Meanwhile, China endures slower growth, but the global supply chain and US consumer pocketbooks bear the brunt. High-profile deals and threats crumble under the weight of implementation and retaliation. The so-called America First strategy increasingly looks like chaos first. India faced a similar fate. After a July 2025 framework deal, Trump imposed 25 to 50% tariffs over India's refusal to halt Russian oil purchases. I said technology talks stalled, pharma and steel exports suffered, and WTO complaints piled up. As a Quad partner, India's trade strain reverberates into strategic tensions, affecting US-India security cooperation. If the US undermines its own partners, can these historic deals ever function as leverage, or are they ticking time bombs? Japan, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, none are spared. Japan's 15% auto truce collapses back to 25% amid unmet rice quotas and digital trade disputes. Brazil's 50% tariffs provoke retaliation on ethanol and meat exports. Canada and Mexico navigate USMCA exemptions while dodging 25 to 35% threats on steel, dairy, and border commitments. Every deal faces ratification gaps, domestic opposition, or unbalanced expectations. Trump's insistence on applying tariffs to all countries signals fairness, but in reality, it breeds confusion, favoritism perceptions, and legal uncertainty. Deals unravel before implementation. Does this look like strategic brilliance or policy recklessness? Markets respond nervously. South Korea's Kospi and Hyundai stocks dip. US futures wobble, yen weakens, and commodity prices fluctuate. Analysts note that while Trump's photo op deals may signal toughness, the actual economics fail the test. Consumer costs rise, manufacturers grumble, farmers brace for retaliation, and allies question US reliability. Even after historic agreements, nothing sticks. Ratification stalls, pledges go unfulfilled, and the promise of revitalized American manufacturing remains a mirage. Trump's tariffs, touted as leverage, are revealing their structural fragility. The underlying problem is systemic. Tariffs cannot substitute for enforceable ratified deals. Partners endure pain better than the US, which faces price spikes, supply chain disruptions, and inflation. The Supreme Court reviews Trump's authority under Section 301 and 232, threatening legal blocks. Globally, allies and rivals alike file WTO complaints, diversify supply chains, and accelerate alternatives to the dollar. US leverage erodes while geopolitical multipolarity accelerates. Trump's universal reciprocal vision collapses under its own weight, leaving the US exposed. Can a strategy that alienates partners and costs consumers ever succeed? Strategically, tariffs fracture alliances. South Korea eyes China and Russia for diversification, threatening Quad cohesion. India feels pressure, balancing US threats with economic interests. Japan grows cautious. Brazil retaliates. And Canada and Mexico navigate trade wars while domestic elections loom. US shipbuilding contracts tied to Korean yards face delays, indirectly aiding China's Belt and Road expansion.
There is a possibility that they could be ruled unlawful. If that happens, in the current situation where reciprocal tariffs are, in a sense, being weaponized, that leverage would disappear. So from the US administration's standpoint, saying to us this time that it would impose reciprocal tariffs and raise the tariff on automobiles to 25% can also be viewed as sending a certain message to the US Supreme Court too. If the tariff is raised, that would be very bad for us. We were agreed to put 15% tariff, both the reciprocal tariff and the automobile tariff, and that 15% rate is neither lower nor higher than for other countries. It's an equal, fair level. But if it is raised to 25%, we lose that 10% price competitiveness, and export volumes will decline by about the same amount as the lost competitiveness. South Korean companies are likely to face immediate uncertainty. That's because tariffs haven't actually jumped 25% yet. There's only been a comment that it will be raised. So no one knows when the increase will take effect. As companies are in the middle of signing contracts, there's a high chance everything will be put on hold while they figure out what will happen to those deals and whether they need to be revised.
In the Indo-Pacific, Trump's economic aggression clashes with security imperatives, demonstrating that leverage without follow-through can undermine both trade and defense goals. Are tariffs strengthening America or weakening it strategically? Historical parallels reinforce the lesson. Trump's 1.0's chorus negotiation, that's Korea-US, steel tariffs, and Phase 1 China deals temporarily scored headlines, but ultimately triggered retaliation and market volatility. Smoot-Hawley deepened the Great Depression. First-term tariffs cost billions in agri-exports. The 2025-26 cycle repeats the same pattern on a global scale. Photo-op deals collapse post-ratification, retaliation ricochets, and leverage evaporates. Tariffs as a permanent fix fail. Trump's empire of trade is more bluff than substance. Even when Trump tries to negotiate, deals collapse faster than headlines can tout them. South Korea's $350 billion investment pledge remains stalled. Japan's auto concessions reverted. India refuses deeper tech and agricultural concessions, and China ignores Phase 2 obligations. Retaliation grows, markets wobble, and US manufacturers scramble for alternatives. Tariffs were supposed to force compliance, but instead they spark uncertainty. Allies hedge, rivals exploit, and American consumers shoulder the cost. Every historic deal is exposed as temporary, fragile, and dependent on political whim. Is Trump's leverage proving force, Or is it just a global game of economic whack-a-mole? US supply chains are fraying. Automotive parts from Korea, semiconductors from Taiwan, pharmaceuticals from India all face escalating costs or blocked access. Manufacturing intermediates constitute 40% of US production. Tariffs ripple through every assembly line, raising input costs and delaying production. Factories don't return overnight, and job gains promised in Trump's photo op deals fail to materialize. Meanwhile, consumer prices climb steadily, feeding inflation and political headaches. The economic fallout is not hypothetical. It's hitting households and businesses directly. Can a tariff-heavy strategy really revive American industry? Or is it just inflating prices while factories move elsewhere? Macro impacts in the US are undeniable. GDP suffers, ISM manufacturing indices contract, wages stagnate, inflation rises, and households lose thousands annually. Deficits swell despite high tariffs, supply chains reroute, industries falter, and consumers pay for policy theatrics. Even Trump's touted leverage yields no lasting gains, only disruption, unpredictability, and uncertainty. Deals that should have been anchors become sandcastles washed away by market realities. Is America paying too high a price for Trump's gamble? Globally, multipolarity accelerates. BRICS nations diversify trade away from US dominance. EU and ASEAN carve alternatives, and major partners question reliability. Deals crumble, alliances strain, and Washington's bargaining credibility erodes. Tariffs meant to coerce cooperation instead incentivize independence. From South Korea to India, China to Brazil, the world reacts to uncertainty, not leverage. Trump's 25% tariffs on South Korea and threats elsewhere reveal the limits of brute economic force in a complex, interconnected global system. Can US trade strategy survive this unraveling? Trump's tariffs are a high-stakes poker game, but the deck is stacked against him. Deals collapse post-signature, ratification stalls, retaliation bites, consumers pay, and strategic alliances fray. Photo op victories fade into market chaos, and promised manufacturing revival remains elusive. From South Korea to China, India to Brazil, the pattern is clear. Leverage without enforceable agreements is leverage wasted. For allies, rivals, and US consumers alike, the fallout is real. After a year of escalating duties, delayed deals, and mounting costs, were tariffs ever a good idea or just a costly illusion? Thank you for watching Statecraft.